Actually, our members are meeting at the bargaining table today with the Council of Trustees, but also with the four Conservatives. And the challenge we have at that bargaining table is the challenge that people are facing in communities. There's been deep cuts to this funding for our schools. We know that many school boards, like the Essex School Board here in this part of the province, had to cut 70 jobs, right? And a lot of those jobs provide the kind of supports that students need to succeed. Students don't succeed if their schools aren't clean and safe. They don't succeed without the skill of education assistance for kids with special needs. There are all kinds of supports that are incredibly important to students. And so part of what our members are doing is trying to fight back cuts in a variety of ways, including at the bargaining table. That can completely be avoided. It can be avoided as long as the Conservatives actually come to the table and understand that the cuts that they've instituted mean that services are being lost for kids, and that they can actually put an end to that they can guarantee some jobs for our members, which guarantees services for kids in schools. And that same thing has to happen for our healthcare system and for our social services, for our universities. Look, you have a university in this town, and the universities across the province are struggling with cuts that have come from this government for the first time in a generation. It's simply not just only in our schools. This is a problem that's happening across our communities for all of our public services. Well, look, I think that what this should do for all Ontarians is to remind us that when the four Conservatives give us a number, it might not just be true. It might just be inflated. And look, if there is a deficit, and we know there's a deficit in the province of Ontario, there's also the reality that we spend the lowest amount per person compared to any other province to provide public services here in Ontario. With the huge geography we have, with the huge diversity we have, we also raise the lowest amount of revenue per person. And that's not because you and me and our friends and neighbors aren't paying their fair share. It's because profitable corporations and the very wealthiest in our communities have some of the lowest tax rates they've had in generations. They could raise revenue, they could fund services, they could deal with the deficit, instead of it always having to be you and I and our friends and neighbors who have to suffer with fewer services and lower wages and difficulties in our communities. That's not the direction anyone voted for in the last election. Well, look, part of the reason why the legislature isn't sitting is because the Premier decided it was more important to try to help his federal cousins in a federal election than to sit in the legislature and face criticism and have to be held to account for the cuts that he's putting into communities. And part of the reason why we continue this campaign even in a federal election is to remind people that Conservatives might tell you they're going to put money in your pocket, but with the other hand, they're taking out money and they're taking out services and they're taking out all kinds of things that we rely on every day. And we've been through this in Ontario provincially. We hear a good game from Liberals, and then when they get elected, we find out that they're not prepared to do any of the things that they said they would do. So it's why elections matter. It's why people need positive options. It's why our union supports Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, but people need to make up their own minds. Look, at least the NDP is saying corporations should have to pay their fair share. The history of our country, the way we built cities like Windsor, the way we built our province was because corporations used to pay their fair share. The wealthiest among us used to pay more in taxes. They can well afford to do that. That means we get services, we get investment, and we get better economies and better jobs and better futures for ourselves and our kids.